activities to teach language function. Classroom activities to teach language functions. Language functions पढाउन के गर्ने? Classroom activities to teach language functions. What are the situations? What do we done by teachers? अस्ति पनि हामीले यही कुरा भन्यौ. अस्ति चाहिँ हामी we were talking about technique related classroom activities. अस्ति चाहिँ technique related हो. अब चाहिँ actual activities only. पहिलो कुरा हामीले के गर्नुपर्छ त भन्दाखेरि पहिलो कुरा चाहिँ inform students about form function relationship. पहिलो कुरा त तपाईले विद्यार्थीलाई सिकाउँदाखेरि चाहिँ के गर्नुपर्छ भन्दाखेरि expose or provide sample examples to students. Provide the ample number of sample examples provide the number of ample number of भनेको पर्याप्त. Provide the ample number of sample examples. Whenever you are teaching language function to your students, provide the ample number of sample examples. तपाईले sample examples हरु के गर्नुपर्छ? Provide गर्नुपर्छ. एउटा कुरा थियो. त्यसपछि दोस्रो कुरा भनेको expose language learners to good models. Expose learners to good models. Learners are like good models सँग expose गर्नुस्. Expose learner to good models. Provide the ample number of sample examples. Expose learners to good models. तपाईले language models हरुमा सिकाउनुस्. अनि अर्को भनेको introduce them exponents. Introduce exponents of language functions to students. तपाईले विद्यार्थीलाई language functions पढाइरहँदाखेरि अर्को ध्यान दिनुपर्ने कुरा भनेको introduce exponents of language functions to students. Establish and show the relation. Establish form function relationship. Class मा तपाईले के गर्नुस् भनेको establish the form function relationship. Establish the form function relationship. तपाईले वाक्य र त्यो वाक्यको सम्बन्ध स्थापित गरेर देखाउनुस्. Establish the form function relationship. अनि अर्को कुरा भनेको हामीले के गर्छौं त भन्दाखेरि conduct in create diverse situations and ask students to respond with correct forms. तपाईले विद्यार्थीलाई यो एउटा गराउनु पर्यो. Provide the ample number of sample examples. Language functions पढाउँदाखेरि के गर्ने भन्दाखेरि कसरी अभ्यास गर्ने त? How to teach language functions. जस्तो विद्यार्थीलाई रिक्वेस्ट भन्ने पढाउनु पर्यो भने के गर्ने त? रिक्वेस्ट भन्ने if you are teaching request to your students, would you mind helping me? Can you help me? Please help me. Kindly help me. पहिला तपाईले language functions पढाउँदै हुनुहुन्छ. What do you do as a teacher? तपाईले त्यो हिजो हामीले पढेका peer activity, role play, situational role play, peer group, interview, conversation, dialogue, these are the teaching activities only. त्यो चाहिँ teaching activities हो भने यो चाहिँ teaching process भित्र पनि यो पर्छ है. अब कसरी चाहिँ how do you conduct teaching language functions activities in the classroom. त्यसैले अब यो अलिकति दुईटा आन्सर अलि फरक खालको एक्जाममा कस्तो प्रश्न आउँछ. Provide the ample number of sample examples. तपाईले language functions पढाइरहँदा when you are teaching language functions, provide the ample number of sample examples. Expose learner to good models. तपाईले विद्यार्थीलाई language functions को मोडल सिकाइदिनुस्. अनि अर्को introduce exponents of language functions to students. तपाईले language functions का वाक्यहरू सिकाइदिनुस्. Establish the form function relationship. Form र functions को relationship. Hello, how are you? र यो कति बेला भन्ने form function relationship. Create diverse situation and ask students to respond with correct forms. विभिन्न सिचुएसन्सहरु क्रिएट गर्नुस् अनि विद्यार्थीलाई वाक्य बोल भन्नुस्. Let's suppose you are in a tight vehicle, you are feeling suffocated. What do you ask to the person sitting nearby the window? झ्यालनेरी बसिरहेको एउटा व्यक्तिलाई के भन्नुहुन्छ? Could you open the door please? अब यस्तो खालको एउटा सिचुएसन दिनुस्. You are feeling unwell. तपाई unwell हुनुहुन्छ. You are feeling unwell. You cannot go to hospital. Make a wish. I wish I could go to hospital. You cannot perform well in mathematics. You cannot request your math teacher. Math teacher लाई रिक्वेस्ट गर्नु पर्यो. त्यसैले यस्ता खालका सिचुएसन्सहरु तपाईले विद्यार्थीलाई दिनुपर्छ. While teaching language function to your students, you have to create situation in the classroom. You have to create some imaginary situation in the classroom and you need to ask your students to respond with them. It means that create diverse situation and ask students to respond with correct forms. तपाईले करेक्ट फर्म सँग के गर्नुस् रेस्पोन्ड गर्न लगाउनुस्. त्यसैले अर्को कुरा हामीले के गरौँ त भन्दाखेरि अर्को भनेको conduct speaking activities conduct गर्नुस्. Conduct speaking activities while making students respond to the situations. Making students respond to the situations. तपाईले सिचुएसन सँग रेस्पोन्ड गर्न लगाउँदा चाहिँ you need to do these things. तपाई के गर्नुस् त भन्दाखेरि conduct speaking activities while making students respond to the situations. तपाईले त्यो सिचुएसन्सहरु रेस्पोन्ड गर्न लाउनुस्. अर्को के गर्नुस् भने make your students aware not to break grammar rules of sentence. Make your students aware not to break the rules of sentence structure. Not to break the rules of sentence structure. Sentence structure को rule break नगर्नको लागि भनिदिनुस्. Make your students aware not to break the rules of sentence structure. तपाईले के गर्नु पर्यो त भन्दाखेरि sentence structure को rule break नगराइ भन्नु पर्यो. You need to tell it to your students. तपाईले विद्यार्थीलाई के भन्नुस् त भन्दाखेरि please don't break the rule of sentence structure. Sentence structure को break rule नगर्नुस् भन्नुस्. यति गरिसकेपछि you can teach language functions well, because language functions दुई किसिमको हुन्छ. One is communicative functions, another is grammatical function. Communicative functions mean what language completes, that is communicative function. Grammar functions means correctness of language. त्यसलाई हामी दुई किसिमको कुरा गर्यौं. अघिल्लो क्लासमा कुरा भइसकेको छ. Classroom activities to teach language functions. Conduct speaking activities while making students respond to the situation, and make your students aware not to break the rules of sentence structure. By doing these activities, you can teach language functions. अनि यो प्रश्न आउँदाखेरि what to consider while teaching language functions भनेर पनि आउन सक्छ. अब अर्को हामीले हेरौं. अब अर्को what are the challenges or issues of what are the troubles or challenges in teaching language functions? Language functions पढाउँदाखेरिको समस्या के हो त? What are the issues or challenges in teaching language functions? Issues or challenges in teaching language functions. Language functions पढाउँदाखेरि सबैभन्दा ठूलो समस्या के हो त? Issues and challenges in teaching language functions. 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 Okay, what are the major issues? यो क्वेशन नोटमा छैन होला है, हजुरहरुले लेख्नुहोस्. Issues and challenges in teaching language functions. Language functions पढाउँदाका इश्यूजहरु के हुन् त? Language functions पढाउन किन गाह्रो छ? Teaching language function is not an easy task. Teaching language function is not an easy task. You easy task होइन, because of complex interplay between teaching language function is not an easy task because of complex interplay between form and function. Form and functions. यो form र functions को relationship ले गर्दा teaching language function is incomplete. कहिलेकाहीँ इंग्लिशमा के हुन्छ भने इंग्लिश को एउटा मेजर प्रब्लम भनेको कतिपय प्रश्नहरु पनि क्वेशनहरु जसरी आइदिन्छ. Would you mind helping me भन्ने हेर्दाखेरि त्यो स्ट्रक्चर र ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन र कम्युनिकेटिभ फंक्शन मै ग्याप हुन्छ कि. In English statement there we find gap between grammar function and communicative function. Would you mind helping me? यो प्रश्न सोध्या कि रिक्वेस्ट गरेको त. Would you mind helping me? Language English language को प्रब्लम के भने in English language there is a complex interplay between form and function. पांच थरी वाक्य एउटै कुराबाट बोल्न मिल्छ. जस्तो तपाईले एक्सक्यूज मी भन्नुभयो, एक्सक्यूज मी मीन्स यु मे डिनाई समथिङ. तपाईले डिनाई गरेको हुन सक्छ. जस्तो इंग्लिशमा हामीले हेरौं न, इफ यु से एक्सक्यूज मी, यो वाक्य एक्सक्यूज मी भन्यो भने तपाईले के गर्न सकेको हुनुहुन्छ? इट इज पोलाइटनेस हुन सक्छ. You may want to join conversation. You desire join conversation. तपाईं conversation गर्न सक्नुहुन्छ होला. Excuse me भनेको asking for permission. तपाई permission मागेको पनि हुन सक्छ. Excuse me, asking for permission. Excuse me भनेको you might have been denying something. Denial पनि हुन सक्छ. भनेपछि in English language अंग्रेजी भाषामा single statement performs multiple activities. Whenever we say excuse me, it might be for the purpose of politeness. Excuse me, can I listen to you? Excuse me, can I tell you what do I think about it? Excuse me, can I enter the class? Excuse me, sir, may I enter the class? Excuse me. You can use the expression excuse me for multiple conditions or situations. That's why excuse me, it is kind of polite expression. Join, if you want to join conversation when other people are having group discussion over there, if you want to join there, you may say excuse me. If you want permission for doing any activity, you may say excuse me. If you are trying to deny something for denial purpose as well, you can say excuse me. That's why English is such a complex language in terms of language functions, where you find complex interplay between form and function. There you find complex interplay between form and function. अंग्रेजी को major trouble भनेको form र function based को interplay चाहिँ, that is the big trouble. And what are the other issues means one form. त्यसैले हाम्रो के हुन सक्छ त भन्दाखेरि एउटा major trouble चाहिँ because of the complex interplay between form and function, teaching language function is not so appropriate. अर्को भनेको चाहिँ consciousness to native language. यो नेटिभ ल्याङ्ग्वेज कन्सियसनेसले पनि ट्रबल हुन्छ. द स्ट्रक्चर ल्याङ्ग्वेज र त्यो अंग्रेजीका फरक छन्. स्ट्रक्चर्स एन्ड ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्स अफ English do not or may not match with, do not or may not match with first language of, do not or may not match with first language. Structures and language functions of English do not or may not match with first language of many language users. First language of many language users. The trouble is here, many language users. For these things, नेपालीमा र अंग्रेजीमा हेरौँ न हामी, many first language learners, first language of many language learners. हामी नेपालीहरुको भाषा र अंग्रेजीको भाषा हामीलाई अचम्म लाग्छ। तपाईलाई नेपालीको भाषा र अंग्रेजीको भाषा फरक लाग्छ। जस्तो would you mind helping me, के तपाई मलाई सहयोग गर्न माइन्ड गर्नुहुन्छ? हामी त नेपालीमा त्यसरी बोल्दैनौं। हामी त के भन्छौं, ए मलाई सहयोग गर्ने हैन, मलाई सहयोग गर्नुस् न भन्छौं। तपाई मलाई सहयोग गर्न माइन्ड गर्नुहुन्छ भनेर त हामी त बोल्दैनौं त्यसरी। भनेपछि तपाई नेपालीमा ट्रान्सलेसन गर्नुभयो भने त्यो भाषा अंग्रेजीमा नबुझिने खालको हुन्छ। इंग्लिश ल्याङ्ग्वेजमा एउटा बिगर ट्रबल के भने why don't you try, why don't you भनेर हामी एडभाइस दिन्छौं। अनि if I were you भन्छौं, यदि म तिमी भएको भए। त्यसले अंग्रेजीका ल्याङ्ग्वेजहरुका के स्ट्रक्चर्सहरु चाहिँ that are not appropriate to or that are not familiar to first language or first language learners, other people who easily translate. Translation मा डिपेन्ड गर्ने फर्स्ट ल्याङ्ग्वेजलाई प्रायोरिटी दिने ल्याङ्ग्वेज लर्नरका लागि यी ल्याङ्ग्वेजहरुले जहिले पनि के गर्छन् त, दे क्रिएट सम अब्स्ट्याकल्स। जस्तो हामीले यहाँ हेरौँ त, अंग्रेजी भाषामा अर्को बिग ट्रबल मैले तपाईलाई एक्जाम्पल सहित भन्नु पर्दा यो ल्याङ्ग्वेज कति प्रब्लम छ। इज दिस अ क्वेशन अर रिक्वेस्ट? वुड यु माइन्ड हेल्पिङ मी, वुड यु माइन्ड हेल्पिङ मी, यो भनेको के हो? इज दिस अ क्वेशन अर रिक्वेस्ट? हेर्दाखेरि इट इज अ क्वेशन, seemingly it is question, grammatical function is question, but it is request. Now see the trouble. Grammatically it is a question, would you mind helping me? It is a question, but it functions as a request in its communication. अर्को क्वेशन हेरौँ हामीले, why don't you visit Pokhara? You are not asking for a question, it looks like a question. यो हेर्दाखेरि क्वेशन देखिन्छ, but it is a kind of advice. यो एक किसिमको एडभाइस। Why don't you visit Pokhara? It looks like a question, but it functions as an advice. That's why there is a conflict. अंग्रेजीको एउटा conflict के हो त भन्दा, conflict between grammatical function and communication functions. त्यो इंग्लिशको एउटा के हो त भन्दा, there you find conflict between or unusual combination between grammar function and communicative function that you find in English. Grammar function and communicative function, you find trouble over here. As the result, communicative functions, as the result, we cannot teach language function so smoothly and we have trouble to convince our learners. You can't do it. The trouble is over here. That's why I wrote the second point. Structure and language function of English do not or may not match with first language of many language learners. With the first language of many language learners. Now see the example. Would you mind helping me? Is this a question or it is a request? It looks like a question, but it is not a question actually. The speaker is requesting you to do something. Why don't you visit Pokhara? Someone is making you a recommendation to visit Pokhara, or someone wants you to visit Pokhara and someone is suggesting to you to visit Pokhara. It functions as an advice. That's why conflict between grammar function and communicative functions of language. This is another issue. What is the another issue? The third point is that in English language there is a gap between, a huge gap between. There is a huge gap. Now see, third point is huge gap between grammar function and grammar function and communicative function. Huge gap between grammar function and communicative function. A huge gap between grammar function and communicative function. This is another issue of teaching language functions. And one more trouble of teaching language function is that PPP model, practice, presentation, practice, and performance or production model, it is not sufficient one. Only by अब यसमा अर्को major trouble भनेको what is the issue of teaching language functions? Point number 4, let's say that PPP model is not sufficient. We have multiple approaches. Yo PPP, let's say पहिलो हामीले यसलाई presentation भनौं. Presentation, the first one is presentation, practice and production, or some people call it performance. This performance. Model is not sufficient. Your model के छैन त भन्दा sufficient छैन. If we follow only presentation, practice, and production method in grammar teaching, we mostly call it inductive method. Inductive method itself is not appropriate. Your method पनि के हो त PPP method, triple P method. This is not sufficient one. यो एउटा मेथड मात्रै पनि के छैन त सफिसिएन्ट छैन. त्यसैले हामीले अर्को मेथड के भन्यौ त इट इज प्रब्लमेटिक one. त्यसैले यो चाहिँ presentation, practice, production, and performance model is not sufficient. यसलाई हामीले sufficient नहुन पनि सक्छ. Most of the time people forget it. कतिपय मान्छेले त रुलै बिर्सिदिन्छन्. यो वाक्य के हो भन्ने कुरा नै बिर्सिदिन्छन्. Make a list of your future plan भन्यो. अब कतिपय बेला हामीले के भन्छौं भने make a list of your future plan. Make a list of your future plans. हामीले कपी चेक गर्ने बेला एसएलसी अरु कर्म make a list of your future plans भनेको छ विद्यार्थीले एस्से कसरी लेख्छन् त भन्दाखेरि I want to visit Pokhara. Pokhara is a beautiful place of Nepal. This is अब यसरी एस्से लेखिन्छन्. I want to visit Pokhara. अब यसरी उनीहरु लेख्न थाल्छन्. Pokhara is the beautiful city. Pokhara is located in Gandaki. I have not gone to Pokhara. That's why I want to visit Pokhara. But they have written the essay. उनीहरुले essay त लेखे. But what is the trouble over here? यहाँ trouble के हो त भन्दा whenever you want them to tell about their future events, to tell them about their future plans, they need to use future tense. I am planning to, I am intending to, we are thinking of. अब यो खालको स्ट्रक्चर जान्दैन. त्यसैले उनीहरु के गर्छन् त भन्दाखेरि स्ट्रक्चर सँग फेमिलियरिटी नहुने पनि एउटा के हो त बिग ट्रबल हो नि त. जस्तो हामीले त भन्नु के पर्यो त भन्दा I am planning to plus verb 1, subject plus shall will plus verb 1. I think I will plus verb 1. I hope plus future tense. I expect plus future tense. I am planning or I am thinking of. These are the different structures available in English language when you want someone to speak of his or her future plans. But the trouble here is that the major trouble के हो त भन्दाखेरि PPP model, presentation, practice, production, and performance model. You do conduct these activities in the classroom, but your students have problem to practice them. Whenever we do not become grammar conscious, whenever we do not become structure conscious, we cannot use English language in appropriate way. We think that we are speaking. We know we must speak. We know that we must use language. But if we don't become structure conscious, if we don't become language function conscious, we cannot write it in appropriate way. That's why speaking and writing alone are not sufficient while making use of others second language. त्यसैले ल्याङ्ग्वेज बुझ्नको लागि त कल्चर पनि थाहा हुँदैन. अर्को एउटा बिग प्रब्लम भनेको चाहिँ ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्स किन पढाउन सकिन्न भन्दाखेरि we are not familiar with text context relation. Okay, अर्को भनेको चाहिँ gap between text context relations. अनि अर्को कल्चरल ग्याप पनि एउटा हुन सक्छ, ग्याप बिट्विन टेक्स्ट कन्टेक्स्ट रिलेसन, ग्याप बिट्विन टेक्स्ट कन्टेक्स्ट रिलेसन्स। अनि अर्को भनेको नो अवेरनेस, नो नलेज अन socio-linguistic rules of language. When you are not informed of socio-linguistic rules of language, तपाई socio-linguistic rules of language जान्नुहुन्न भने तपाईलाई भाषाको मिलेर पनि तपाईको स्ट्रक्चर बिग्रन्छ। मान्छे मरेको बेला के भन्ने, डु यु नो इट? तपाईलाई थाहा हुनु पर्यो नि त। तपाई एउटा साथीको घर जानुभयो, उसको फ्यामिलीको कुनै मेम्बर मरेको छ, अब कुन वाक्य बोल्ने, what type of sentence is to be spoken there, you must know it. When you are congratulating someone for his or her success, what to say? If you are in a huge trouble, how to convince your friends? If you want someone to complete your activities, what to say? That's why we second language learners, we are not well informed about gap between text and context. कुन वाक्य कुन सन्दर्भमा बोल्ने, जति बेला पनि वाक्य बोल्दैमा इंग्लिश करेक्ट हुँदैन, यु मस्ट नो इट। जति बेला पनि मे आई, अब जस्तो अंग्रेजीमा हामीले कहिलेकाहीँ भन्छौं नि त, तपाईलाई न्यारेसन पढ्ने बेला ध्यान दिनुपर्छ। कुनै टिचरले स्टुडेन्टलाई भन्यो, राम सेड टु सीता प्लिज हेल्प मी, राम सेड टु सीता प्लिज हेल्प मी, राम रिक्वेस्टेड सीता टु हेल्प हिम। तर टिचरले स्टुडेन्टलाई भन्नुभयो, टीचर सेड टू स्टूडेंट्स प्लीज डोंट मेक अ नॉइज। अब यो वाक्यमा प्लीज सँग नेगेटिभ आयो, डोंट आयो, अब भइदिन्छ के इन्डिरेक्ट स्पीचमा लैजाँदा टीचर आस्क्ड स्टूडेंट्स नट टू मेक अ नॉइज। अघि रामले सीतालाई भन्दा प्लीज भन्दा रिक्वेस्ट भएको थियो, अब यहाँनेरि सेड टू आस्क्ड भइदियो भनेपछि ट्रबल इज अलवेज ओभर देयर, त्यहाँ ट्रबल देखा पर्यो। त्यसैले ल्याङ्ग्वेज भन्ने कुरा त इट्स अ डिफरेन्ट थिङ। हु इज स्पिकिङ, who is the speaker, these things that create trouble. That's why gap between text context relation, no knowledge on socio-linguistic rules of language. If you don't have knowledge on socio-linguistic rules of language, you cannot teach language functions, and our students also they find themselves in confusion. Actually, wait, make up. Okay, now see the next one. अब अर्को point हेरौं हामीले, we have to see the next one. अर्को point हेरौं। Excellent. Okay, next, अब अर्को हामीले भन्दा there is no knowledge on socio-linguistic rules of language. If you don't have knowledge on socio-linguistic rules of language, you cannot teach language functions well. हामीले language functions पढाउन नसक्ने एउटा मेजर ट्रबल भनेको that is all because of अब अर्को ट्रबल भनेको नेक्स्ट वन इज knowledge on limited number of exponents or knowledge on limited structures of language functions. For one situation, एउटा सिचुएशन्स को लागि तपाईलाई अब धेरै हुन सक्छ नि, जस्तो रिक्वेस्ट भन्यो। अब रिक्वेस्ट को लागि हामीसँग कति किसिमका वाक्यहरू होला नि त? 7 टाइप्स अफ सेन्टेन्स स्ट्रक्चर होला नि त। We may have, there might be 7 types of sentence structures. अब यहाँ 7 प्रकारका वाक्यहरू हुन सक्छ। It is possible over there. Knowledge on limited structures of language functions. Language functions को limited, knowledge on limited structure of language functions. If you have knowledge on limited structure of language functions, you cannot teach and convince your students about language functions. अब अंग्रेजी पढाउने टिचरलाई रिक्वेस्ट कति तरिकाले गर्ने भन्ने थाहा नहुन पनि सक्छ। जस्तो हामीलाई एक्सप्रेसिङ लाइक डिसलाइक भन्ने छ नि, लाइक र डिसलाइक कति तरिकाले भन्ने त? अब आई लाइक डान्सिङ, आई लभ टु डान्स, आई डोन्ट माइन्ड, आई डोन्ट माइन्ड looking at dance. If there is one thing I like, it is people who dance. If there is one thing I hate, it is people who smoke in restaurants. I object to the way people ask me question on the way. I don't object to the way people take my help when they are in need. What type of sentence you have to speak? तपाईले कस्तो किसिमको वाक्य बोल्ने? लाइक र डिसलाइक भन्ने बित्तिकै I like dancing, I don't like dancing त्यो होइन। अंग्रेजीमा त 20 किसिमका वाक्यहरू छन्। I like singing, I don't like singing, I am fond of singing, I enjoy singing, I cannot stand, it gets on my nerves, it gets on my nerves when I see someone dancing, I cannot tolerate when someone speaks loudly। भनेपछि अंग्रेजीमा लाइक र डिसलाइक भन्ने बित्तिकै लाइक र डिसलाइक शब्द राखिरहनु पर्दैन। इट इज नट needed. There is no need of being dependent only on like and dislike words. You can express your like and dislikes in multiple ways. That's why when teachers and students they know, or when they do have limited knowledge on limited structure of language functions, they cannot teach language functions so well and they cannot practice language function in a better way. जस्तो अब मान्छेलाई इन्ट्रोड्युस गर्ने कसरी? हेलो आई एम प्रदीप, हाई आई एम प्रदीप, हाई आई एम प्रदीप लामिछाने, हाई व्हाट्सअप गाइज आई एम प्रदीप, यति मात्रै हो त? बट वी हैव मेनी वेज, हामीसँग त हजारौं तरिकाहरू छन् टु इन्ट्रोड्युस आवरसेल्फ। दैट्स व्हाई इफ वी डू हैव, अब हामीसँग प्रब्लम के हो भने knowledge on limited structure of language functions, language functions को तो limited structure ले के गर्दिन्छ त? it creates trouble, यसले समस्या ल्याउन सक्छ। त्यसैले हामीले बुझ्नुपर्ने कुरा के भने it is possible there knowledge on limited structure of language functions, language functions को limited structure को limited structures को knowledge ले चाहिँ it destroys or it hampers or it creates burden in language functions। language functions पढाउने कुरालाई फरक पार्छ। अर्को प्रब्लम भनेको टिचिङ ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन एज अ ग्रामर। ग्रामर एक्टिभिटी को रूपमा ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन पढाउनु इट इज अनदर बिग ट्रबल। टिचिङ ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्स एज grammar rules. If we teach language functions as the grammar rules, teaching language functions as the grammar rules, whenever we teach language function as the grammar rules, we cannot teach it in better way. यसलाई हामी के गर्छौं त? बेटर वे बाट पढाउन सक्दैन। त्यसैले मेजर ट्रबल इज दैट teaching language functions as the grammar rules. Whenever we teach language functions as the grammatical rules, you cannot teach it. हामीले फर्मुला बनाएर पढाउने तरिका छ, यसले हाम्रो ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन सुध्रदैन। हामीले कसरी पढायौं त भन्दाखेरि why don't you plus verb1 plus object, यसरी पढाउँछौं विद्यार्थीलाई। would you mind यसरी पढाइन्छ नि would you mind plus gerund plus this is this if I were you यसरी पढाउनुहुन्छ हामी सरले if I were you I would plus one object ल यो एडभाइस यस्तो please comma plus one plus object it is a request whenever you teach language function in this structure you cannot teach language function in appropriate way it does not develop any sense in the mind of learners. That's why teaching language function as the grammar rules, whenever we teach language functions as the grammar rules, it destroys or it creates problem in teaching language functions. That is another problem of teaching language function is that whenever we teach language functions as the grammar rules, we cannot teach them in better way. That's why don't you plus one grammar पढाउँदा यसरी पढाउनु हुँदैन. Don't teach language functions in this format. Don't teach language functions in this format. And another issue is अर्को issue भनेको teaching language functions deductively. Teaching language functions deductively. Whenever we teach language functions deductive approach. Use of deductive approach. सुरुमै नियम पढाउने अप्रोचले के गर्छ? Use of deductive approach. Whenever you prescribe rules before you make students practice and perform activities, it hampers understanding of language functions. Don't provide rules first. Don't explain the rules first. You are not required explaining the rules. Whenever you explain the rules, whenever you make your students rule conscious, whenever you want them to memorize them forcefully, whenever you give priority to accuracy over fluency, your students cannot learn language functions. That's why while teaching language functions, do not adopt the rules of grammar translation method. हामीले के भन्छौं त भन्दा acceptance of grammar translation method, GT method, while teaching language functions, it is another dangerous point. Acceptance of GT method while teaching, let's say whenever you do it, acceptance of GT method while teaching language functions पढाउने बेला ट्रान्सलेसन गर्ने यसलाई यस्तो खालको कुराहरु गराउनु भएन. अनि अर्को कुरा हामीले के भन्छौं भने separate teaching of language functions, isolation of language function from language skills. Another trouble is that isolation of language functions from language skills. यो language skills बाट language functions ला isolation नगर्नुस्. Isolation of language functions from language skills. Acceptance of GT method while teaching language functions. Isolation of language functions from language skills. If you isolate language functions from language skills, isolation of language functions from language skills, यसले के गर्छ त भन्दा it creates a burden. That's why use of deductive approach, acceptance of GT method while teaching language functions, and isolation of language functions from language skills. If you isolate language functions from language skills, it creates problem. That's why we cannot. These are the major troubles of teaching language functions. Language functions हामी किन पढाउन सक्दैनौं भन्दा all these are the things. यिनीहरु चाहिँ के हुन्छ? These are the major problems. अब हामीलाई सोध्न सक्छ what are the classroom techniques? अब हाम्रो कक्षा 7-8 मा भएका ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्सहरु के हुन्? त्यो युनिट 5 मा मैले पढाइसकेको छु है. ल यो टपिक पनि सक्यो. अब भोलि मैले पढाउने अर्थात अबको नेक्स्ट टपिक हामीले प्र्याक्टिस गर्ने भनेको टीचिङ लिसनिङ. What is listening? Objectives of teaching listening, problems of teaching listening, channel disturbance of teaching listening, अनि अर्को activities for teaching listening, classroom activities, अनि अर्को भनेको teaching best materials for. अब भोलिको क्लास तपाईहरुले एकचोटी सरल हेर्ने टीचिङ लिसनिङ. मैले एक पिरियडमै सकाउँछु, धेरै टाइम लगाउँदिन. टीचिङ लिसनिङ पहिला What is teaching listening? First one. Second भनेको objectives of teaching listening. Objectives of teaching listening. What are the objectives of teaching listening? Importances of teaching listening. What are the importances of teaching listening? यो अघि पढाएको टपिक तपाईहरुको नोटमा थिएन है, अब यिनीहरु त सबै नोटमा छ. Importances of teaching listening. अब बढी क्वेशन सोध्ने भनेको difficulty while teaching, listening activities. अर्को हामीलाई छ classroom activities for teaching listening. What are the classroom activities for teaching listening? Listening पढाउँदाका classroom activities के हुन्? And classroom techniques. यस्ता प्रश्नहरु भोलि मैले सबै सकाउँछु, धेरै लाग्दैन, यो एक प्याराग्राफ हुन्छ. What objectives of teaching listening, principles of teaching listening, importance of teaching listening, difficulty while teaching listening, classroom activities for teaching listening. यो एउटा हाम्रो एक्टिभिटिज हुन्छ. अर्को प्री रिडिङ, पोस्ट रिडिङ, वाइल रिडिङ एक्टिभिटिजहरु छन्. त्यसलाई भोलि यसो एकचोटी पढौं. त्यो अहिलेको टपिक चाहिँ तपाईहरुले कहीँ नपढेको टपिक थियो. What are the issues of teaching language functions? Challenges and problems सेम हो. उस्तै हो. ल त्यो अहिलेको ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्सको टपिक्सहरु चाहिँ त्यो याद गर्नु पर्यो. हामीले ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्स किन पढाउन सक्दैनौं भन्दा ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्स आर कल्चरल म्याटर्स एन्ड वी आर नट फेमिलियर विथ culture of English language. We teach language function as grammar in Nepal. Language functions are separately taught. There is isolation of language functions from language skills. Language functions is taught or functions are taught as grammar lessons and they are taught deductively. PPP model is not sufficient while teaching grammar functions. That's why teaching grammar function is a matter of a huge challenge. त्यो एउटा ह्युज च्यालेन्ज हो. अब चारवटा क्वेशन पढेपछि त्यो एउटा प्रश्न सक्यो है. अब हामीले पढ्न बाँकी के रह्यो त? टिचिङ लिसनिङ, टिचिङ रिडिङ, टिचिङ राइटिङ एन्ड दिस ओन्ली. मैले अगाडिको तीनटै पढाइसके. बेसिक कम्युनिकेटिभ फंक्शन्स इन ल्याङ्ग्वेज पढ्यौं, ल्याङ्ग्वेज फंक्शन्स र स्ट्रक्चर पनि पढ्यौं, स्ट्र्याटेजिज भनेको अस्तिको त्यो, इश्युज एन्ड च्यालेन्जेस भनेको आज पढेको त्यो 2.3 को त्यो पढ्यौं. टिचिङ प्रोनाउन्सिएसन, टिचिङ ग्रामर एन्ड भोकाबुलरी वी डिड इट. अब भोलिबाट मैले टिचिङ रिसेप्टिभ स्किल्स एन्ड टिचिङ स्पिकिङ राइटिङ यो महिनाको 31 गतेसम्म यो चारवटा सकिन्छ. लिसनिङ, रिडिङ, स्पिकिङ, राइटिङ. त्यसपछि बाँकी रह्यो युनिट 1 र युनिट 6. ल